Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. We will begin today part 3 of our series on the sacrament of marriage, holy matrimony. And it's going to be very interesting. I think you'll get a lot out of this one. But first, as always, we'll start with a few questions and answers from radio replies, classic work by the priests in, I guess the 20s, 30s, who were taking questions from Protestants and atheists and progressives and anybody who had an issue with the church, and it's a fantastic work. I can't remember if there are 3 or 4 volumes of radio replies, but it was by Fathers Rumble and Carty, and I tell you, if you don't have these books on your shelf, you really need them. I mean, there's nothing new under the sun, as the Bible says, as Ecclesiastes says. So the questioner has been asking them about the sacrament of penance, and he says, is it possible to secure forgiveness without going to a priest? And they answer, Catholics who are unable to find a priest are forgiven if they make an act of perfect contrition or sorrow, which such an act supposes at least the intention of going to confession when the opportunity presents itself. For perfect sorrow supposes the will to do God's will. Protestants and other non-Catholics can also secure forgiveness by perfect sorrow if they are not responsible for their ignorance of the law of Christ. For lack of knowledge would be a condition of true sorrow in those who do not comply with the actual law. Such people would go to confession if they realize the obligation, but who can know that he has such perfect contrition? Perfect contrition implies a hatred of the sin to be forgiven, not from any motive but because it has offended God. It implies intense sorrow for having committed it, the will to make a full reparation of harm done, and the firm purpose to avoid committing it again. What certainty has one that he possesses such dispositions? Is sorrow supernatural? Is his conviction of forgiveness merely self-persuasion? A case of the wish being the father to the thought? He has no definite personal revelation that he is forgiven. Catholics who receive sacramental absolution are at least not left in such doubts and anxieties, for even though their sorrow be not as perfect as it should be, the sacrament itself will supply for certain defects. And the person continues, but people can simulate sorrow or deceive a priest by telling him only so much as they wish, and they answer, Catholics know that they cannot deceive God. God uses his priest as his agent or instrument. Even though the penitent have not supreme sorrow, yet he must be genuinely sorry and is obligated to confess all grave sins. If he deceives the priest, then although the priest utters the words of absolution in good faith, God does not apply the effects of those words to the soul. A Catholic goes to confession when he wants his sins forgiven. He knows that if he merely pretends sorrow or deceives the priest in serious matters, not only are none of his sins forgiven, but he goes away with the additional mortal sin of sacrilege. He does not go to confession for the sheer joy of adding to his sins. If he is not sorry and does not intend to make genuine confession, he just stays away and goes on with his sins. Only when sincerely desirous of receiving God's grace does he present himself in the confessional. He is not so foolish as to go through the farce you suggest. And the person asks that a priest can absolve only certain sins in only certain conditions. And they say yes. The penitent must tell fully and sincerely all his serious sins. He must be truly sorry for having committed them, determined to try to avoid them in the future, and promise to make good any injury to others by defamation of character or theft of money and goods. And he asks, do not Catholics sin because they know they can get absolution and confession? And they answer, does a man break his leg because he knows the doctor can set it? Catholics regard sin as a very great evil, and no Catholic thinks he is morally free to continue to commit any sin with or without confession. If he does commit sin, he knows that he can get it forgiven provided he repents and determines to try to serve God for the future. Above all, he knows that confession gives him no permission at all to commit the same sin again, and if he has the intention of doing so, he knows that the absolution is null and void. Might I ask whether Protestants can sin because they know they can get forgiveness without confession? Or is there no forgiveness for Protestants? All right, Yeah, we got at least another page or two of questions and answers on penance, on confession. I'll hold off on it. I want to get on to matrimony because, that's been the purpose of these last. I guess this will be the third in the series, and people have really enjoyed it. I've gotten some good feedback on this one. Remember, the Catholic Church alone forbids divorce. The Catholic Church literally holds matrimony in a regard, views it in a light that no other Christian church or non-Christian religion on earth does. Matrimony in the Catholic understanding is absolutely unique to the Catholic Church. So under the topic of the duties of the married, Father Sprago says, the following are the duties incumbent on married persons. It is the duty of the wife to obey her husband as the man is the head of the family and representative of God. The man is superior to woman. That man is superior to woman is shown by the fact that he was created first, and the woman was only created of his flesh and as a helper for him. 1 Corinthians 11:9. The man being the head of the family, the woman is subservient to him as the members of the body are to the head. The apostle says the church is subject to Christ, so also let the wife to the husband in all things. Ephesians 5:24. The woman is commanded to cover her head in church to indicate that she is under the dominion of the man, whereas the man uncovers his head because there is no one over him but God. 1 Corinthians 11:10. Yes, veiling is a beautiful tradition. We really need to get back to it. Sometimes in church now, especially if it's like a Polish family, you'll see the girls wearing veils. That's about it. We really need to get back to that tradition. The wife ought to fear her husband, Ephesians 5:33, that is, show him the deference due him. After the fall, God ordained that the woman should be under her husband's power and should yield him obedience, Genesis 3:16, because Eve lusted after power and ate the apple first. The husband therefore has every right to rule his wife, but he ought to rule with kindness, gentleness, and leniency, for she is in one sense his equal, having been made out of the flesh taken from his side. Therefore St. Ambrose bids the husband remember that his wife is not to be treated as a servant, that he must not make his authority felt to be a burden. Besides, the woman being weaker can claim to be gently treated, 1 Peter 3:7. It is more shame for the man than for the woman if he resorts to blows to enforce his authority. As the representative of God, the husband has the right of controlling the household. The angel did not appear to Mary, but to Joseph when the flight to Egypt was made, because the husband's duty is to rule and govern. The husband and wife owe each other love, fidelity, and mutual aid in all circumstances in their life. Husbands ought to love their wives as Christ loves the church, Ephesians 5:25, as their own bodies, 5:28, as themselves, 5:33. The love of husband and wife ought not to be a purely natural love like that of the lower animals, nor a purely human love like that of the heathen, but a holy and supernatural affection like that of Christ for the church and the church for Christ. Hence they ought each to bear with the infirmities of each other patiently and indulgently, or generously close their eyes to them. An example of this was given by the Greek philosopher Socrates, whose wife was a perfect virago, V-I-R-A-G-O. Apparently means hot-tempered. I don't know. Says when she stormed at him, he took no more notice of it than the rattling of a passing vehicle. One day when he was seated before the house with his scholars from a window above, she rated him soundly and finally threw a jug of water over him. Socrates rose and changed his place, remarking with a smile, "I might have known that the storm would have ended with a thunder shower." The wife will influence her husband for good far more effectually by silence, meekness, and prayer than by reproaches. St. Augustine tells us that his mother did more for the conversion of her husband Patricius by the saintliness of her life than by her words. Dissensions between husband and wife ruin their happiness. Without peace at home, nothing pleases, even amid all the luxuries wealth can command. Married people owe fidelity to one another, Hebrews 13:4. They ought scrupulously to guard against every appearance of unfaithfulness and to avoid familiar intercourse with the persons of the other sex. For where jealousy enters, all conjugal happiness is at an end. St. John Chrysostom is of the opinion that the direst poverty, the most incurable malady, fire even and sword are lesser evils than jealousy. The Jews used to stone the unfaithful husband or wife, for they considered adultery no less heinous crime than murder. Leviticus 20:10. St. Paul declares everlasting damnation to the portion of adulterers. Ephesians 5:5. The married must not defraud one another of their conjugal rights. 1 Corinthians 7:1-5. But they must abstain from excess inconsistent with the sanctity of their state. Tobias 6. Or Tobit, I should say, Tobit 6:17, and only keep in view the object indicated by the angel to Tobias in 5:22. Otherwise, the devil will prevail over them. 5:16. To the duty of mutual aid, it appertains that husband and wife should live together, and that neither the one nor the other should avail himself or herself, if contrarieties or calamities overtake them, of any pretext to leave the other. They are bound to assist each other in the training of the children, to succor each other in illness, to aid each other to bear more easily the ills of life, and to perform their religious duties with greater facility. Eve was created for the sole purpose of helping Adam, for God said, "It is not good for a man to be alone. Let us make him a helpmate," or a help like unto himself. Genesis 2:18. It is, however, a sad misfortune when the wife is not a support but a cross to her husband, when instead of lightening his burden, she only adds to their weight. Almighty God declares that a really good woman is a treasure of inestimable price. Proverbs 31:10, far above the most costly jewels. Jewels serve to adorn their owner, and that which is to him a brilliant ornament in the day of prosperity is to him in adversity a timely aid. So a good wife is in herself a source of riches, a valuable jewel, which retains its worth amid the vicissitudes of life. Isn't it a shame people don't talk like this anymore? I mean, 1890s, this was just the way people talked. Vicissitudes of life. No, we don't talk that way anymore. And it is a shame, actually. Yes, I could go on that topic. I will hold my tongue for now, because I want to get through this one today. Right. It is the duty of both husband and wife to provide for their children and to train them in the fear and love of God. Children are no more the property of their parents than riches are. They are gifts from God. Psalms, I don't even know what number that is. They are his creatures, destined to be happy with him forever. They are the children of their Father in heaven, and are only given in trust by him to their parents to be brought up in his service. Thus, parents are only servants bound to carry out the will of God in regard to their offspring. The duties which parents have to discharge toward their children are these. They have to safeguard them from everything which would be prejudicial to their health. They have to supply them with their daily sustenance. They also have to provide for their future. It is the duty of parents to deny themselves everything which might prove injurious to the health of their children. They must refrain from giving way to their passions or indulging in excesses, lest they transmit a heritage of disease or sin to their offspring. Like father, like child, the proverb says. Parents ought not to give themselves up to the pursuit of pleasure and amusement, to the neglect of their young children. Let them remember how distressed Mary and Joseph were over the child Jesus was lost, how for 3 days they sought him, sorrowing. Luke 2:48. Let them learn a lesson from the birds. They do not leave the nest until their young are fully fledged. They are indefatigable in supplying them with food. They teach them to fly. Parents ought to work for their daily bread of their family. Even wild beasts take the utmost care of their young, yet some parents are, as the Holy Scriptures say, cruel as the ostrich in the desert. Lamentations 4:3, which lays her eggs in the sand and heeds them no more. Children ought not to lay up for the parents, but the parents for the children. 2 Corinthians 12:14. They ought to provide for their children's future by laying a certain amount of money to bequeath to them, by sending them to school, by fitting them to follow the calling most in accordance with their inclinations and capabilities. Above all, by training them in the fear of God, which is the surest means of promoting their temporal as well as their spiritual welfare. Have you noticed all of this is foreign to our modern culture? All of this? Every bit of it? I mean, every single bit of it? Yes, there's a reason for that. David declares, I have been young and now I am old, and I have not seen the just forsaken, nor his seed begging bread. Psalms 36:25. Finally, it is the bounden duty of parents to pray for their children and thus to call down on them the blessings of God. Job also offered holocaust daily for every one of his children, lest perchance they should have sinned against God. Job 1:5. St. Monica prayed fervently for her son and with the happiest results. Parents, says St. Francis de Sales, ought often to speak of God to their children, but yet more often to speak to God of their children. In regard to the bringing up of their children, it is the duty of parents to have them baptized immediately after birth. Immediately. To give them their first religious teaching, to set them a good example in all respects, and to treat them with kindness rather than severity. St. Charles Borromeo says that training children means bringing them to Christ. Parents ought to have their newborn infant baptized as soon as possible. To defer baptism for more than 10 days after the birth of a child without good reason is a sin. Did you know that? Yes, it is a major mortal sin not to have your child baptized within the first 10 days of birth unless you cannot do it otherwise. That really needs to be spoken in every parish frequently. This is serious stuff. They ought to instruct their children early in the fundamental truths of religion, to teach them that there is a God in heaven, that he knows and sees everything, and if we obey him, he will take us to himself in heaven, etc. They should beware of frightening their children by threats of hell and the devil, lest they inspire them with repulsion for religion. Another interesting point, huh? And also of allowing them to imbibe false ideas, for later on they find they've been deluded, they will not believe in anything. I don't think Santa Claus falls into that category, by the way. I think it's okay to tell your kids there's a Santa Claus. After all, he is based on a saint, and let kids be kids. That's my opinion. Parents must instruct their children in the law of God as Tobias did. He taught his son from his infancy to fear God and to abstain from sin. Tobit 1:10. And when he thought his death was near, he gave him godly admonitions. Tobit 4. I guess, just 4. I don't know. They should endeavor to stifle evil propensities in their children and bring them up in the discipline and correction of the Lord. Ephesians 5:4. In other words, little Johnny, you can't be little Jill. They should teach them to pray, beginning with the sign of the cross and the invocation of the holy name, and proceeding to the Our Father, the Hail Mary, and the Creed. The children's daily prayers should be very short, so as not to become wearisome to them. Furthermore, parents should set their children a good example. We all know how much more influential example is than precept, and that what is seen makes a far more lasting impression than what is heard. The actions of the father and the mother are the lesson books of the children. How careful should they therefore be not to let them see them do anything blameworthy, and also to warn the servants not to say or do anything in the presence of the children which they ought not to see or hear. 1890, most people had help in their house, so we don't much have servants these days, which is a shame. It's a darn shame. I could really use a maid. And a butler. I could use a chauffeur. Yes, if anyone would, like to bequeath that unto me, I should gladly accept. Let parents remember our Lord's words. He that shall scandalize one of these little ones that believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone be hanged around his neck, and he should be drowned in the depths of the sea. Matthew 18:6. Those who neglect this warning will have reason to tremble, for if the soul of the child is lost through the parent's fault, they will hear the voice of God saying, I will require his blood of thy hand. Ezekiel 33:8, I believe. In training the children, parents should combine kindness and firmness. Too great severity is a fault. For rebukes and punishment are a medicine which, if administered too frequently in too strong doses, does harm instead of good. It is not by incessant beating with the hammer that the goldsmith fashions the most elegant ornaments. To be always finding fault is a great mistake, but it is no less a one to let the children's wrongdoings pass unpunished, to pamper and to spoil them through irregulated affection and false kindness. He that spareth the rod hateth his son. Proverbs 13:24. Give thy son his way, and he will make thee afraid. Ecclesiastes, or Ecclesiasticus, maybe. That would be Sirach, 3:9. To allow a child to have his own will in things is highly reprehensible. He should be firmly, not sternly, compelled to yield. Of all parental duties, that of training the children in the fear of God is the most important, for on the manner in which it is discharged, the temporal and eternal happiness both of parents and children will depend. The education of their children ought to be for the parents a matter of such moment that nothing should grieve them so much as to see them turn out badly, or rejoice them so much as to see them walking the truth. 2 John 1:4. The religious training of the child devolves principally to the mother, as his earliest years are spent at her knee. The father, engaged in the occupations of his calling, has little time and less inclination for the work of instruction. The father and mother supplement each other. The father, by his position of command and force of character, represents the divine power of justice, and the mother, with her gentle kindness and tender love, represents the divine attributes of bounty and compassion. It is the part of the father to confirm with his parental authority what the mother teaches and to enforce the orders she gives. So I guess I should say this is actually really kind of foreign to me. My dad's not a good guy, okay? I think he's on his fifth wife now. He was extremely abusive and extremely, to the point that I have a brother and sister in heaven. Raised entirely by my mother. And my grandfather would have been a great father figure, but he developed ALS and died when I was 10. I never actually had any example of a father in my life at all. So, this is the broken state of our world. This is the broken state of the family. What are you going to do? This is one of the reasons that I wanted to read this book to you, so people can understand the roles that God actually gives us and how we're supposed to do things. I know it's going to be tough for a lot of you to hear. I mean, wives being obedient to their husbands absolutely goes against feminism, right? Being stern yet loving to your children. I don't know about most. A lot of parents never had that example and don't understand how. Treating each other with respect. I mean, we grew up on, Everybody Loves Raymond and garbage like that, where the father is always like Homer Simpson. He's an idiot, right? And no one has any respect for dad, right? This may almost seem like a fairy tale, but it's actually normal and natural, and we really got to get back to it. And of course, homosexuality is absolutely disordered. The Bible says that neither the homosexual nor the effeminate will enter the kingdom of heaven, but we've normalized it, right? I mean, no, we got to get back to traditional, and by the way, I'm not talking about people with same-sex attraction. Okay, that's a mental issue. I mean, until recently, it was even in your DSM psychology books labeled a mental disorder. You're not judged for that. It's engaging in gay sex and the lifestyle. That's what the Bible absolutely says is forbidden and a real quick way to go to hell. So we really need to get back to, and of course the same is true for adultery, divorce. Jesus absolutely forbade divorce in all four Gospels. Contraception, abortion. We could go down this road, and it's absolutely the 100% opposite from what our culture says is normal. But this is the truth. This is the truth as taught by the Catholic Church, given the authority of God by Jesus Christ. When he said, those who hear you hear me, those who reject you reject him who sent me. When he said, what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. If a man will not listen to the church, let him be unto you as a pagan and a heathen. This is serious stuff. Nobody, no politician, no doctor can change the Word of God. No philosopher, no novelist, no actor or actress can change the Word of God. So, it's just, it can be hard for a lot of us to swallow. But it's what's right. It's what's right. So where was it? Yes, Father with gentle kindness. Yeah. It is the part, okay, yeah, and the child, yeah. I'll just pick up where I left off. It is the part of the father to confirm with his paternal authority what the mother teaches and enforce the orders she gives. The future happiness of the child depends on the early training he receives, for, as a rule, what he is in his youth, that he is in his old age. Just as out of a piece of soft wax one may model an angel or a devil, so it is with the character of a young child. The first impressions are always lasting, most lasting. They are never fully effaced from the soul, any more than marks made in the bark of a young tree ever disappear. But they do widen with its growth. In later years, the character cannot be molded afresh. As the sapling is bent, the tree is inclined. The land, if it is to yield a harvest in autumn, must be tilled in early spring, not left uncultivated until the summer. Sapling bent and inclined. If you bend a young tree over, it will grow in that direction. That's what he means. Can it be supposed that if the souls are neglected in childhood, these culprits are lost, their parents are not to blame for it? Consider, old parents, what responsibility rests upon your shoulders. Those who pay no heed to the upbringing of their children are more culpable than those who put them to death. For the latter only takes the life of the body, whereas the former causes the destruction of the soul. Some parents are at great pains to amass wealth to bequeath to their children, but they do not care in the least how they are brought up. The temporal and eternal happiness of the parent also depends in great measure on the training they give to their children. Those who bring them up badly are generally severely chastised by God in this world, and often it is their own children who are their scourge. By that wherein they have sinned, by that they are punished. King David, through an exaggerated fondness for his son Absalom, did not correct him for his faults, and in after years he caused bitterly to regret his weakness when Absalom rebelled against him. 2 Kings 18. And I would highly recommend you read William Faulkner, Absalom. Excellent story. Excellent. Faulkner was quite a hero for me. Heli, the chief priest, was too indulgent toward his wicked sons, and the chastisement foretold to him by God through the mouth of Samuel speedily overtook him. His 2 sons were slain in battle, and the old man, on hearing the sad tidings of Israel's defeat, fell off his seat and died. 1 Kings 4:18. Nor can negligent parents expect to fare better in another world, for the apostle compares them to unbelievers. If any man have not care of his own, especially those of his house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than the infidel. 1 Timothy 5:8. On the other hand, a rich reward is promised hereafter to those who have brought up their children well. The eternal felicity of a mother depends on the manner in which she has trained her offspring. 1 Timothy 2:15. The father of a son will not be sorrowful at the approach of death. Neither father of a good son will not be sorrowful at the approach of death. Neither will he be confounded before his enemies. Ecclesiasticus, I think, 35. I never can tell the difference. Father Sprague is saying Ecclesiastes or Ecclesiasticus. One is now called Sirach. I always get confused. Good parents who have conscientiously fulfilled their duties when they appear before God, be able to say, Behold, those whom thou gavest me I have kept, and none of them is lost. John 17, yes, 17:12. Now, probably a little bit more controversial topic, if we could even suggest that. 1890s. Catholic Church really frowned upon mixed marriages, and I don't mean mixed race. I mean the marriage of a Catholic to a non-Catholic. These days, people don't really think about it that much anymore. They really ought to. This is actually very important. Mixed marriages, by which we understand the marriage of Catholics and non-Catholics, have always been disapproved of by the Church. One, because in such marriages the proper training of the children is a matter of great difficulty, if not altogether impossible. Two, because such unions are productive of no concord, no true happiness. Three, because the Catholic is in great danger of losing his or her faith. And four, besides, the non-Catholic may at any time obtain a divorce, leave his or her Catholic partner, and contract another marriage. Yes, very important. Even in the Old Testament, mixed marriages were prohibited. The Jews were not permitted to make marriages with the Canaanites, Deuteronomy 7:3, nor with the Samaritans, although they kept the law of God and had the books of Moses, because of the heathen ceremonies they observed. In like manner, in the present day, the Church discourages the marriage of Catholics to non-Catholics who, though they call themselves Christians, hold doctrines which are at variance with the teaching of the Church, of Christ. The Church warns her children against such alliances, just as a loving father might warn his son against undertaking some journey which he knows will expose him to great perils. In early times, parents who gave their daughter in marriage to a heretic were subject to 5 years' penance. The dangers attendant on mixed marriage are these. At the non-Catholic party, whether Protestant or non-Christian, far from assisting in the education of the children, will be an obstacle to it. And when we're talking religious education, we're not talking teach them to read and do math. I mean, that should go without saying, but, how many people even think of a religious education these days? And will perhaps throw scorn and ridicule on the Catholic faith and practice. Give you an excellent example. Michael Savage, conservative talk radio host, one Catholic parent, one Jewish parent. Even though the parents promised to raise him as a Catholic, he was raised as a basically agnostic Jew. I don't know what he is now. But that's not uncommon at all. And even if this was not the case, the example of an unbelieving parent will have the worst consequences for the children. And not unfrequently it happens that the non-Catholic, urged by the ministers of his religion or his relatives who represent that it will be prejudicial to their temporal interests if his children are brought up as Catholics, yield their persuasion and depart from his promise that they should be so brought up. And what becomes of the children if their Catholic parent dies and the other espouses a member of his or her own religion? A Catholic cannot do his children a more cruel wrong than by marrying one who is not of his own religion. Moreover, true happiness can hardly exist in such marriages where there is not a union of the most important of all matters. Heartfelt affection and confidence between husband and wife are scarcely possible if they differ on a point which is all important, namely religion. Mixed marriages are, moreover, fraught with no slight danger to the salvation of those who contract them. The wise and enlightened King Solomon took for himself heathen wives in his old age, and they prevailed over him so far that from a worshiper of the true God he became an idolater, and allowed temples of the false gods to be erected in his kingdom. The influence of heretics who call themselves Christian is often far more perilous than that of open unbelievers. I agree completely. If reading heretical books is apt to mislead, how much more is the continual and close contact with heretics to be dreaded? Besides, we are far more ready to adopt the opinions of one to whom we are attached, for we are blinded by affections. The Holy Father declares that mixed marriages have the effect of obliterating the distinction between truth and error and fostering the idea that all religions are equally good. Furthermore, mixed marriages are most unfair for the Catholic party. The non-Catholic may at any time obtain a divorce and marry again, whereas the Catholic is bound not to take a second partner for as long as the former lives. What an equivocal position is that of the divorced woman. She is married and yet has no husband. She has the mortification of seeing her rightful husband with another wife, while she is condemned to live a lonely life, looking down upon perhaps by the world. Looking down upon, looked down upon. There, I got the wrong suffix. And worst of all, to be separated from some, if not all, of her children. Well, then, may the church exhort the Christian people to be aware of entering into matrimony with those who are aliens to the faith they hold. The church tolerates mixed marriages on 3 conditions. 1, both parties must promise that their children shall be brought up as Catholics. 2, the Catholic, good luck on that. Good luck on that. I was engaged to a very beautiful, very wonderful Presbyterian girl who said she might convert to Catholicism, but certainly our children would be Catholic because she thought she should, obey her husband. She was brought up fairly traditional. And when we got down to it, she said absolutely not. Her children would be with her and her parents in the Presbyterian church, and I could go to hell. And I said, well, that's the end of our engagement right there. Thank you. That's how you regard me? You want me to go to hell? Okay. The Catholic must promise to endeavor to bring the non-Catholic to the knowledge of the truth. The non-Catholic must promise to allow the Catholic liberty for the free exercise of his or her religion. Without these 3 conditions, the church will not sanction a mixed marriage. By tolerating or permitting mixed marriage, the church does not approve of them. On the contrary, she strongly disapproves of them, and she insists so forcibly on the children being brought up in the Catholic faith because this is the main object of matrimony. It has already been shown that the chief end of marriage is to train up the children in knowledge and fear of God. The aim of the Christian parents should rather be to leave behind him inheritors of the kingdom of heaven than heirs of his earthly possession. Consequently, it is the first duty of a Catholic who has wedded one who does not hold the faith to ensure his child's salvation in as far as he can. How deeply is that parent to be commiserated who destroys the soul of her offspring by allowing the poison of error to be instilled into its mind? Remember, 1890s, the Catholic Church didn't equivocate. There's true Christianity, which is Catholicism. Protestantism is heresy and false. The church was not as ecumenical then as it is now, and frankly, there are a lot of logical problems with the ecumenism that we engage in these days. If you believe there's one truth, you can't believe that 50,000 Protestant denominations that each believe something different from the other have anything in relation to the truth. Anyway, when the first glamour of an ill-regulated affection fades away and the conscience again makes its voice heard, the path of wedded life is beset with thorns. The birth of the first child, which ought to be an occasion of glad rejoicing, is a source of anxiety to the mother, for she fears that it will be taught to regard the true faith with hostility. How her conscience reproaches her! And each successive child, which ought to be welcomed as a blessing from the hand of God, is a fresh accuser, calling to mind her treachery. The Catholic party is also bound to bring the non-Catholic to the knowledge of the truth, not by coercion or persuasion, for proselytizing only adds to the number of nominal Catholics, not to the loyal children of the Church, and is abhorrent to the Catholic Church, who only desires the erring to be brought into her fold for their own free will and through full conviction. Now that's hard, isn't it? You know me. I'm Irish. I'm gonna argue, and the church actually doesn't want us to win people over that way. Let them be won by prayer and good example. Let the unbelieving husband be won by the conversation of the wife. 1 Peter 3:1. If the Catholic wife is seen to be modest, yielding, patient, faithful, etc., the non-Catholic husband would be led to reflect and consider whether he may not judge the tree by its fruits. I would say that does not often happen the other way around. Women tend to believe they are right and the man is wrong no matter what. So if you're a Catholic husband and you marry a Protestant wife, good luck getting her to convert. At any rate, he will grandly divest himself of his former prejudices against our holy religion. But he must not be pressed with arguments and instructions, but rather every word should be carefully avoided that might wound his susceptibilities. For those who are outside the church are not to blame because they have not had the privilege of being born and brought up in the true faith. Furthermore, the Catholic party must fearlessly observe his or her religious duties. The other will respect such observance. Good luck on that, too. Listen, honey, we're not eating meat on Fridays. We're going to have fish or vegetables. Every Friday she's going to be making hamburgers and grilling steaks. I guarantee it. A man who is not devoid of the other will respect such observance. A man who is not devoid of good feeling will have no wish to oppose the pious practices of his wife. He will, maybe not the other way around. He will know himself to be a gainer, not a loser by them. Sometimes Protestants assert that they agree with Catholics on the fundamental truths of religion, only different on the non-essentials. This is utterly false, and yes, it is so utterly false. What the Catholic holds most sacred, the Protestant despises. Witness the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which Protestants regard as an act of idolatrous worship. In the face of differences so deep-rooted, all idea of unity is a mockery. The Catholic who contracts a mixed marriage without the benediction of the Church commits a mortal sin and cannot be admitted to the sacraments. Did you know that? Did you know if you marry that Protestant without the Church's permission, you've excommunicated yourself de facto? Catholics who act thus are declared to be guilty of a mortal sin. Because they sin through disobedience by refusing to conform to the precepts of the Church, they give great scandal and deny the faith. They turn their back upon the sacraments of the true Church and receive the rites of a heretical sect. A heretical sect. All churches are not equal. Thus they give the preference to a false church, or at least they allow its equality with the true one. They cannot be readmitted to the sacraments unless they manifest sincere contrition on account of their sinful union and are ready to comply with the requirements of the Church. Many a one takes a just vow of his conduct on his deathbed. Conscience often slumbers like a volcano which for long years shows no signs of activity, then suddenly bursts into a flame. That flowery language again, you gotta love it. So conscience awakens at last, and the unhappy soul is consumed by the flames of remorse and despair. No one who firmly believes the Catholic to be the only true and saving faith will be content to see his children brought up in a soul-destroying error. And it may be safely affirmed that in the majority of cases, those who contract mixed marriages sooner or later heartily regret the step they have taken. Now, we're going to discuss, I think this is actually going to wrap it up. Yes, the unmarried state, my despised state. Like I said, all I ever wanted was to get married and have kids. You know, it's all I ever wanted in life from the earliest age. I wanted to be a husband and a father. I was never like, oh, girls are yucky, you know. 5 years old, I was like, I want to get married and have kids. That was always me. That's the one thing I've never been able to do. So, the unmarried state is better than the married because those who do not marry have far more opportunity for attending to their spiritual welfare and can attain a higher degree of glory hereafter. Yeah. Sorry. I have not. If you enter into religious life, you become a priest, a monk, a nun, sure, yeah. I should not disparage the unmarried, non-religious state, if that's God's will, but to me it just seems like a very sad period on the end of a sentence that was all your ancestors that came before you that gave you life, and you just ended the chapter. And without any fanfare, without any great accomplishment. Maybe that's just me. And God willing, maybe someday I'll meet the right lady. Who knows? But I don't find it in any way worthwhile. I'm sorry, I know the church says that the unmarried state is actually preferable. I don't find it in any way redeeming, worthwhile, or good at all. And I know I got to get my mind right on that. But, I'm just not there. My heart says I want to have a wife and kids. My brain says I want to have a wife and kids. My body says I want to have a wife and kids. There's nothing in me that wants to be single. Never has. I don't know if it ever will be. I have had a need for family since I was born, probably because of the circumstances of my family. I did not choose this life. So, Father Spirago says, it is better and more blessed to remain in virginity or in celibacy to be united in matrimony. The state of virginity surpasses the married state in excellence as much as angels surpass men. It is as far above matrimony as the heavens are above the earth. It is as much superior to the soul as to the body. Marriage is honorable, but virginity is far more honorable. Such is the opinion of the fathers. The heathen entertained a great respect for those who voluntarily embraced a life of celibacy and chastity. I think the key word there would be voluntarily. Let's just say I've fallen in many regards in that way, both voluntarily and on the virginity part. The witness the reverence shown by the Romans for vestal virgins. Okay, so I wasn't a good teenager. I'll just put it that way. We'll leave it there. The richer and nobler the bridegroom, the more the bride is congratulated upon her espousal. How much more ought those be deemed happy who by the practice of chastity have chosen the Christ for their spouse and for his sake. Like St. Agnes of old despised every earthly suitor, however wealthy and powerful, the unmarried are more free to study the concerns of their soul. St. Paul says, he that is without a wife is solicitous of how he may please God, but he that is with a wife is solicitous of how he may please his wife, and he is divided. Frankly, most married Catholic couples I see attend church more often, seem much more interested in the things of God. But hey, again, I'm probably wrong. 1 Corinthians 7:32 through 34. The unmarried also can attain to a higher degree of glory. St. John beheld a multitude before the throne who sang a new canticle that no man could say but those 144,000 souls, for they were virgins. All right, well, I missed out on that one too. Our Lord, when on earth, commended the state of virginity both by precept and example. Our Lord said that there are some who renounce matrimony for the kingdom of heaven's sake, adding, he that can take, let him take it. Now, I can't take it. But anyway, that's Matthew 19:12. St. Paul also said, he that giveth his daughter in marriage doth well, but he that giveth her not doth better. 1 Corinthians 7:38. And again, speaking of widows, more blessed shall she be if she should so remain. The apostle did not marry, and many of the saints took vows of perpetual virginity. Of this, the greatest example was given to the Blessed Mother of God, as we learn from her own words to the angel, Luke 1:34. It is also the opinions of the fathers that St. Joseph did the same. So a lot of church history tends to indicate that St. Joseph was a widower. He had a family, his wife died, his children were grown. Blessed Virgin Mary had taken a vow of chastity. At that time, she had to be married to be cared for, provided for. Nobody was going to pay her way in life, and there was no work for women to do. So he had then taken a vow of chastity and married her. She was about 14. He was probably in his 50s. And as far as taking a vow of perpetual virginity, no, probably not on that case. Not if he had a family with children. But taking a vow of chastity after the fact, yes, he almost certainly did. Some of the saints, especially in the early ages of the church, endured the most agonizing tortures and a cruel death rather than to break their vow of virginity. It is related of St. Hilary, Bishop of, Poitiers, who, before he received his holy orders, had been married and had a daughter, that while he was in exile, he received a letter from his daughter telling him she was grown up and was about to be married. He wrote in answer, to say that he was soon returning home and would bring a portrait of another suitor. She should compare the two and choose between them. On his arrival, he gave her a crucifix and exhorted her to consecrate herself to Christ by a vow of virginity. This she did shortly after she died a holy death. Just before she expired, her father said to her, "Behold your celestial spouse. He has come to take you to your eternal nuptials." In the pages of hagiology, we read of many saints who, although married, live a life of chastity. Yeah. So, this it's a very foreign concept to me. It's a very difficult concept for me. It's in extreme opposition to my nature. I'll just put it that way. But I'm trying. We all try. Most of us fail. But I can tell you, there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot of virtue in loneliness at all. Maybe it's penance. Hey, maybe it's penance. We'll go with that. All right, y'all. Have a great week. We have finally finished the 7 sacraments. Next week, we're going to get into sacramentals, another very uniquely Catholic practice and concept and idea and whatever you want to call it. Have a wonderful week. Tuck in. The weather's going to be awful this weekend. We're getting like 5.5 inches of snow, 30 to 50 mile per hour winds. If you don't hear from me next week, it's because I don't have power. But say a prayer for all of us, and I'll say a prayer for all of you. And I'll talk to y'all next time.